Greetings, welcome back to the Old Ways Rising Farm YouTube channel. Today we're going to talk about making stuff in a different way than we have before on the channel. We've done some wood carving, we're going to do some blacksmithing, we've talked about that. Today we're going to talk about a very useful, kind of universally useful idea, and that's paint. How to make your own paint. Okay? If you look at a duck like this, a large carving, this is painted with oils, right? This is painted with oils. However, if you go to the store and you buy enough oils from an artist shop to paint something this big, you're going to go broke, right? They are expensive, okay? So we want to be able to paint things a lot of the time, whether it's preserving the outside of a building or putting some paint on our duck to make it look realistic, right? We want to paint stuff. We want to protect the things that we make. And you can make your own oil paints, and whether you're painting something like that or just want to clear coat something to protect it. This is a hunting boomerang that I made. And the wood was so pretty I didn't want to color it at all, but I still wanted to put a water-resistant clear coat on it. Okay? So we can make our own coatings, paints, and varnishes very easily. Okay? And you can save a lot of money in doing it. So this is what we're going to talk about today, how to make some of these things. Obviously there's a lot of different kind of paints out there, and coatings and adhesives. What we're going to be talking about today are the oil paints and adhesives. Okay, that's still stuck. While I'm talking about stuff, could you grab the pliers from the steps? I'm going to need pliers to open that. Assistance from my wonderful, wonderful wife. So the first thing we want to talk about is the binder in an oil paint. So you can think about an oil paint system, or any paint system, as a couple of things. You have the binder and you have the solids that it's binding together. Okay? And just like, if you think about concrete, right? What is the binder in concrete? It's the Portland cement. But just Portland cement in and of itself doesn't have a whole lot of strength. However, when you take Portland cement and you mix it with sand and lime and grit and your aggregate, your pebbles, and your sometimes fiberglass fibers and everything else that you put in there, you can make an overall system that is very strong. That's what we want to do today. So the first thing is the binder. The binders that we're going to be talking about are drying oils. Now that's kind of a misnomer because drying oils don't dry. They chemically cure the same way epoxies, the same way like epoxy and super glue and things like that. They chemically cure, they don't dry. But still they're colloquially called drying oils. So we'll use that term knowing it's wrong. What all of these have in common is they are long chains of carbon and hydrogen that have some double bonds in them. So instead of all of the carbons being linked by single bonds and then all of the extra space on the chain being hydrogen, in some cases they are missing a pair of hydrogens and include a double bond. Okay? Why does that matter? Well, because those double bonds can interact with oxygen in the atmosphere. And because oxygen can bind twice, when they interact with an oxygen, that oxygen can act as a linkage, sticking two chains of oil together. Okay? So as you paint the coating on a surface, the thinner the film, the more surface area it has to react with oxygen. The faster oxygen can come in and grab two of those fat chains and stick them together, making one chain. Okay? And that's now called a polymer. And as those chains get longer and longer and longer, the oil gets harder and harder and harder. Now, this is a slow process in and of itself. It takes just any of the drying oils, we'll talk about what they are here in a minute, by themselves with nothing else in them, will take weeks to months to harden to the touch. And then from when they harden to the touch, another 6 months to a year to fully cure. So the first step is those small chains of oils being linked into long chains. The second step is those long chains being linked to each other, which is called cross-linking. Okay? So any of these oils by themselves with nothing else in them will take weeks to single-digit months to cure to the touch, and then another 6 months to a year to fully cross-link. Now, humans are impatient. We don't want to wait that long. Okay, so stuff has been done to these to accelerate that. But before I get into that, I have 3 different examples of drying oils. Your common drying oils are safflower oil, like this, linseed oil, of which commercial boiled linseed oil is one example, and tung oil you can get commercially at the hardware store as well. We're going to come back to this in a minute. You can also get walnut oil as a good drying oil. And there's a couple others that you will see from time to time. But those are the 4 most common. There's a synthetic equivalent to the natural drying oils called alkoids, which are very, very stinky and relatively toxic. But they're in a lot of your commercial oil paints, the alkoids. But that is a synthetic drying oil. Okay? Now, the oldest way to make drying oils dry faster is to expose them to ultraviolet light. So back in the Renaissance, they would take linseed oil and put it out on a roof over the summer for 3 to 6 months in its jar before doing the painting. And the UV light will weaken those double bonds and help them interact with oxygen, which then accelerates the dry time of the finished oil painting. That is called stand oil because it was left to stand. Literally, very common name. You can still buy stuff called stand oil, but it really isn't stand oil anymore. It's the second category. After a while, people figured out that instead of letting it stand for 6 months, you could do the same thing if you heated it up to within about 15 degrees of its flash burn temperature. This is a dangerous process, right? So you bring it up almost to the smoke point for about half an hour and then let it cool back down. If you get too hot, it flashes into flame and burns your house down. Don't do that. Okay? But it has the same impact as letting it to stand in UV for 6 months. That was traditionally called boiled linseed oil, but is now usually called stand oil. We're about to make this more confusing. You can go to the hardware store and buy boiled linseed oil, which is not boiled linseed oil. It's linseed oil that has a chemical catalyst. There are organic catalysts. There are also mineral catalysts. Usually these days they're always a manganese oxide or a cobalt oxide that is added in very small quantities. So they don't have to do the dangerous step of actually boiling it. So that's now what's sold as boiled linseed oil is actually chemically catalyzed linseed oil, not boiled. If you want actual boiled linseed oil, you'll have to go buy stand oil, which is not stand oil anymore. Don't shoot the messenger! Okay? So, safflower oil, you can get a lot of these safflower oil. You can get walnut oils from artist supply companies. The other one you'll find commonly is tung oil. Okay? Tung oil is oil from the tung tree nut. It is like pure actual tung oil is pretty much interchangeable with these others. Most of what's sold commercially as tung oil has high gloss solids in it. Some form of, some sort of varnish that is soluble in the oil. And that makes it high gloss. So tung oil finish is usually tung oil as the binder, but then also has more hardeners than boiled linseed oil, and has a solid which is high gloss. Okay. Adding solids, take this and again take it from just binder and make it concrete and make a good solid finish with a film on top of your surface. If you just take this or this and you put it on wood, in and of itself with nothing else added, it will soak in and it will not leave a film finish. If you add solids to it, you create a film finish with this or this as the binder. Okay? So when we want high gloss, we add varnish solids. If you want low gloss, which is what I want for the ducks because there are no shiny ducks in nature, you want to add a solid which is going to flatten out the finish. The two I would recommend are wax. We'll take it down to a waxy luster. Well, that's what we're going to do. We'll talk about recipes here in a minute. Diatomaceous Earth is a good solid to add. Do not breathe it. This is the most dangerous stuff on the table because if you breathe it, you can get silicosis, white lung. Bad news bears, right? So this is pre-measured because I always do this. You want to do this outside with a mask, okay, where you have a nice cross breeze and nothing's going to come in on you. It's not toxic. You don't have to be worried to get it on your fingers, but if you get it in your lungs, it will cause scarring and lesions in your lungs. So don't do that. This is more diatomaceous earth. We're going to talk about that in a minute. So the difference between a absorbing finish, which waterproofs the surface by absorbing into it, and a finish which leaves a film, is how much solids we add to the binder. Okay? Now, this is sealed shut, so this is going to take me a minute to open. And while I am fighting with my obnoxious bottle of linseed oil, there we go, we'll talk a little bit about safety. These drying oils are the oils which are infamous for catching people's houses on fire. The old and oily rag in a bag spontaneously combusting is true, and it is these drying oils that do it, along with some other things, but these are in the category of things that will do it. When people start talking about these, people want to say, well, linseed oil is dangerous. You'll have people that say, linseed oil is dangerous, but linseed oil has been made safe. They're wrong. That is not true. Okay? They're all dangerous. You'll see people that say, well, boiled linseed oil has been catalyzed, so it's a little bit more dangerous than raw linseed oil, so you don't have to worry about raw linseed oil. Also wrong. They're all dangerous. The key point here is it doesn't matter whether you've got safflower oil in its raw form up to fully catalyzed boiled linseed oil or a tung oil finish. They are all dangerous. In pure physics terms that you could measure with an instrument, the ones that have a catalyst added are a tiny bit more likely to spontaneously combust. But if you create the conditions where any of them can spontaneously combust, any of them can spontaneously combust. They are all dangerous. So anything that gets these oils on them needs to be handled as something which could catch fire at any moment, because it can. Now, it won't do that equally easily under all circumstances, right? So my recommendation is that anytime you're using these, you have an outdoor, away from a building, metal can that you can put it in. If you burn wood, put it right in the wood stove and light it. If you have a burn barrel, put it right in the burn barrel and light it while you watch. Make sure it has fully combusted safely and you're good. That's my recommendation. If you are in an urban environment and you can't do that, then you need to get a properly approved flammable hazards cabinet or containment system for your waste. If you put this stuff on a flammable material in a bag and throw it in the trash can, eventually you're going to have a trash can fire. And we've already lived through 2021. We don't need more trash can fires. Right? So, be very careful with these. Assume they're all equally dangerous, because guess what? They're all equally dangerous. Okay, now, how do we go from the raw material to a coating? Well, if all you want to do is make the wood look slightly darker, similar to how it would look if it was wet, and have it soak in but not leave a film, you can use it in its raw state. Okay? Oh, one last thing before we actually make these. Boiled linseed oil from the hardware stores is acidic, more so than the paint mediums that are made for artists. Okay? So when my wife does painting on a canvas, she'll use the safflower oil. It's not as acidic. Okay? But wood is acidic and durable, so we can use the cheap stuff. This little jar costs about the same as this big can. Okay? So the teeny tiny bits that you're using, the teeny tiny blobs of paint for putting on a canvas, use the ultra purified low acidity stuff that's made for artists. But you can still use all these recipes. If you're painting a giant block of pine, this is not going to be damaged by the slight acidity of this. So you might as well go with the cheap. If you are, but if you're painting on paper or a canvas or waterproofing a canvas, don't use this. It'll eat right through your canvas. Okay? So that's the last bit. But if you're watching this as an artist who wants to paint on a canvas, keep watching and give it a like just as much as you should give it a like if you're painting on wood, because you can just buy the proper medium for canvas and use these ingredients in the same ratios and still have nice medium. Okay? So, the next thing we need to talk about are the pigments. So, I'm only going to go over pigments that you would really use in painting something like this. We need a white. The best white is either titanium white or zinc, titanium dioxide or zinc oxide. Those are your best whites. The old white is lead. Okay? Lead is honestly chemically the best white that we have. It just is. At the same time, don't use it. This will work as well but dry a little bit slower. We'll talk about that in a minute. Your pigment is also a catalyst. So having metal oxides in your oil will accelerate their dry time. This is not a very good catalyst. So if you're using titanium dioxide, you're kind of depending on the natural catalytic capability of what they added to your oil to begin with. Lead is the fastest catalyst that we know. So lead white paint made with lead oxide as the pigment will dry in a day. White paint made with titanium dioxide as the catalyst will dry in a week and a half. So you have to wait a little bit longer. That's the cost of being safe. Right? You still should do it. But paints with a high, that are primarily white, will take a lot longer to harden than any of the rest of the colors, because it's the weakest catalyst that we have. Next we have the earth pigments. So raw umber is almost black. It's a very dark brown. And it is the natural color of a black duck. And we have burnt umber. We'll talk about raw versus burnt in a minute. This is raw sienna, which is mallard bill yellow, and burnt sienna. Okay? So raw umber versus burnt umber, raw sienna versus burnt sienna. Raw, burnt. What happens when we take one of these earth pigments, these are all iron-based pigments. Okay? When we take the iron-based pigment and we heat it, it's converted to red rust. So it gets redder in the spectrum. Okay? So raw sienna is predominantly iron without much other colorings, but it's a yellow. This is going to be primarily geothite as the mineral composition in this yellow, which is converted to limonite or my brain's dying on me. Polished as a gemstone. Silvery color in the rock. Hematite, right. Hematite, okay? So we're going from geothite to hematite, okay? Same thing here. All of the iron minerals that are here in this dark are being converted to the hematite, which makes it lighter and redder. That's the impact of burning. The chest of this mallard is burnt umber, just straight up. The red on the head of the canvas back that we're going to paint in the next video in the series is pretty much straight up burnt sienna. Okay? Mallard Bill is raw sienna. For our blues, we're going to have ultramarine blue. Okay. For green, this is chrome oxide green. Then we have iron black. Okay. We have iron black, which is iron oxide. This is the high iron oxide, like black rust, like the mill scale that you see dropping off when somebody's forging, doing some blacksmithing work. That's this. And this is red iron oxide, which is just straight up ground up rust. Okay. Now, cost. On average, these are about $12 a piece. Are we running low on batteries? Okay. On average, these are about $12 a piece because I'm buying them in bulk. So look around and you can find these at a pretty good price. Half of these come from Bailey's Ceramic Supply, and that is it's a good place. You can get a lot of this material from Ceramic Supply because people use it for making glaze. Right? People use this stuff for making glazes. So look up your ceramic supply companies. This is a completely unsponsored video. My honest opinions are my honest opinions. So this is a good place that you can get some inexpensive pigments. I think a lot of these were less than $10 from the Ceramic Supply Company. The ones from artist supply companies are a smidgen more expensive. I forget who this came from. That's the Bailey Pottery bag. But if you look around for bulk earth pigments, you can still get these very inexpensively. I think this bag was about $20 for the whole bag. That's more than a lifetime supply. And these siennas and umbers, I think we're like on the scale of $12 or $15 a bag. And these from the ceramic supply were most of them less than $10 a bag. Okay, so this is not a large amount of money that you see here. So this is a very economical way to make large amounts of paint. And unless you're going to go in to do this on industrial scale and make it your full-time job, one bag of most of this stuff is going to be a lifetime supply for the average craft person. Now, old-fashioned house paint is iron oxide and linseed oil. If you're going to paint a whole house, now you're going to spend a lot more money, right? But still, that's the game. So these are the ingredients. And then for solids, for when we want to make a heavy body medium, this is my heavy body medium, are, again, the Diatomaceous Earth and beeswax. Beeswax and linseed oil are fully compatible with each other, but you don't want more than 10% of either in the other. If you want to make a paste wax, you can take beeswax and add 10% linseed oil, and then thin it down with turpentine to your desired consistency. Okay? If you want to make a heavy body painting medium, you can use 90-10, favoring the linseed oil, and put 10% beeswax in. When you get into the 50-50 range, you tend to get glop that will not harden on cooling because there's too much oil in it, but there's not enough oil to harden, so it also won't harden as a paint. So the middle range is dangerous. But if you have less, 10 to 20% or less of one in the other, you'll be okay. Okay, whether you're trying to go for a thin wax or a thick paint. But they are fully compatible with each other. So those are the ingredients. I'm going to cut this video off here, recharge the batteries, and then in the second installment of making paint, we will actually take these and make some paint.